There's a story I often think about on sleepless nights. It's about a girl, frail, quiet, whose legs once refused to carry her. She lived in a world where no one really believed in miracles. A place where poverty, illness, and limitation built 3 walls around a child's dream. As a little girl, she didn't run or jump or climb like the other kids. She would sit by the window, looking up at the sky, imagining she could fly. Doctors said her legs might never work again. Neighbors pitied her, or worse, ignored her. And as for the girl herself, she didn't say much. She just kept looking beyond. But there was something inside her no one could quite see. Not strength, exactly. Not even defiance. It was a quiet belief, fragile as thread, but strong enough to tether her to the idea of something better. I tell this story not because she became famous, not because her name was written in bold headlines or followed by gold medals, but because even when no one else believed in her, she still believed in herself. And maybe, for us, those of us lying awake in the dark tonight, that's the reminder we need most. Close your eyes for a moment, and let me tell you the story of a girl who once couldn't stand, and a spirit that refused to sit still. They said she would never walk again. They said she would never walk again, even as a young child. She endured more than most people do in a lifetime. She was born into a large family, one of many children, in a small rural town where dreams were often too expensive to afford. In a creaky wooden house that sighed when the wind blew. She was the quiet one, skinny, often sick, easily forgotten in the noise. When she was just 4 years old, a high fever came and wouldn't go. At first, no one thought it was anything serious. Kids got sick all the time, didn't they? But this time was different. When the fever finally broke, her legs didn't work the same way. The diagnosis came late, but it was clear. Polio. It was the kind of word that changed everything. She couldn't stand on her own. One leg dragged behind the other, weakened and stiff. People started looking at her differently, some with pity, some with quiet disbelief. That poor girl, they whispered. She'll never walk again. Her mother, a thin woman with tired hands and fire in her eyes, refused to accept that. Every week, she carried her daughter to clinics and hospitals, sometimes by bus, sometimes by foot, on long, dusty roads, with hope as her only fuel. The little girl hated the metal braces they strapped to her legs. They were cold, heavy, and made her feel more like a forgotten machine than a child. But every morning, her mother helped her into them like she was suiting up a tiny soldier. And in a way, she was. The girl rarely cried. She just went quiet. But in her silence, there was something steady. Something that didn't bend, even when everything else felt broken. One day, quietly and without warning, she took a single step without the brace. No fanfare. No applause. Just one trembling foot in front of the other, and the stunned silence of a mother who had waited years for that very moment. That step led to another, then another, and soon, she was walking, still slow, still shaky, but walking nonetheless. Each day, before the sun rose, she'd sneak out behind the house and practice. The backyard was rough, the dirt packed and uneven. Her shoes were too worn, the soles nearly gone, but she walked. Then she ran. At first, just a few feet, then farther. She fell a lot, scraped her knees, tore her sleeves, but always, she got back up. No one taught her. There were no coaches, no books. Just her and the stubborn rhythm of her own heart saying, "Try again." Just one more step. People said poverty was a limit. That illness was a life sentence. That little girl should be quiet, careful, and kind. But with every step, every lap around that dusty yard, she was quietly saying no to all of that. By the time she was 8, she could walk like any other child. Her legs were still thin, still tender in the evenings. But she could run, and that changed everything. She began to run just for the feeling of it, not for praise, not for attention. Just for the sound of the wind in her ears, the beat of her heart, and the earth moving beneath her. She wasn't chasing anything. She was just learning what freedom felt like. No one knew what was coming when she started to run. After months of learning how to walk again, the girl found something new. Joy in motion. She wasn't just walking anymore. She was running. It started with small laps behind the house, through dirt and scattered stones. The soles of her shoes were thin and cracked. The laces frayed, patched together with thread. But every time her feet lifted from the ground, something in her heart did, too. Each step was a quiet rebellion, a reply to the doctors who had once delivered hopeless news, a whisper to those who pitied her, a defiance of fear she never spoke out loud. At school, she was invisible, thin, quiet, still walking with a slight limp. She avoided physical activities, often standing off to the side while other kids ran and laughed. But one day, during gym class, the teacher organized a short sprint, just for fun. No expectations. She didn't plan to win. She wasn't even sure why she agreed to run. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of her that missed the wind brushing her cheeks. When the whistle blew, she didn't look left or right. She just ran. There was no strategy, no thought, only rhythm, the kind her body had been learning in silence for years. And somehow, she crossed the finish line first. The class fell silent for a moment. Even she looked confused. It hadn't felt like a victory. It had just felt like something real. That afternoon, the gym teacher called her aside. He didn't praise her or promise her anything. He simply asked, "Have you ever thought about joining the track team?" She hadn't. But that question, it planted a seed. Joining the team wasn't easy. She didn't have the right shoes. She didn't own the school uniform. No one could give her rides after practice. But she had something else. Determination that lived quietly inside her chest, louder than anything outside. She started watching the team from a distance. They memorized warm-ups, noted breathing techniques. Then she went home and practiced them alone. The coach noticed. One evening, after practice, he handed her an old pair of running shoes. They weren't new. They'd been worn by other athletes before her. But they were hers now. Not fancy, he said, but good enough to start. And with that, she became a runner. Day by day, things changed. Her classmates saw her differently. Not as the girl who once walked with braces, but as the girl who ran and kept running. Each training session was a battle, with pain, with memory, with the fear that maybe, just maybe, none of this would last. But she didn't stop. She showed up early, stayed late, ran even when it hurt, even when no one was watching. She didn't run to impress anyone. She didn't run for applause. She ran because every time her foot hit the ground, she felt like she was proving, if only to herself, that she was no longer defined by what once held her back. And with each lap, she grew stronger, not just in her body, but in the belief that maybe, just maybe, she was meant for more. She took her first steps beyond that little town. She never thought she'd leave that little town, a place of dusty roads that stretched toward quiet fields, a place where names were passed down through generations and dreams, if they came at all, were kept small enough to fit inside the walls of a kitchen. But one day, the school bus rolled past the edge of town and didn't stop. And this time, she was on it. Her school had qualified for a regional track meet, and she was on the list. She sat near the window, her bag resting on her knees. Inside were just a worn pair of running shoes and a hand-me-down uniform. No fancy gear, no cheering crowd waiting for her. But she was going. For the first time in her life, she was going somewhere that required courage. Her family couldn't come. There wasn't enough money, and too many mouths to feed. But before she left, her mother took both her hands, looked her in the eyes, and said nothing. Because sometimes, silence carries more love than any words could. That night in the dorm before the meet, she lay awake, not from nerves, from all. She'd never seen a real track before, wide, smooth, like something from a movie. She'd never heard the echo of announcers or the roar of a crowd before a race. She didn't expect to win. She wasn't even sure what winning meant in a place like that. But when the starting gun fired, something inside her clicked. She ran, and the rhythm came back, like music in her bones. She didn't feel fast. She felt free, and somehow, as if by accident, she crossed the finish line ahead of everyone else. The scoreboard confirmed it. She had won. First place in the 100-meter dash, then again in the 200, and once more in the relay. Her name, once unfamiliar, now passed from one mouth to another in surprise. Who is she? Where did she come from? How have we never heard of her? The coaches started watching. Reporters scribbled notes. A camera flashed for the first time in her direction. But she remained the same. Quiet, steady. When asked how she did it, she simply said, "I just try to run a little better than yesterday." Back home, her medals were placed on the shelf above the kitchen sink, right next to the old pair of shoes that started it all. She still woke up early, still trained alone when needed, but something had changed. Now, when kids saw her, they didn't see the girl with the limp. They saw a runner, a real one. Then, one afternoon, her coach handed her a letter. It was an invitation. The National Olympic Development Program was looking for young athletes, and they wanted her. She stared at the envelope for a long time. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something once impossible becoming real. She didn't say yes right away. She needed to feel it, to remember the why, and she did. She remembered the dirt yard behind the house, the smell of old earth, the mornings before sunrise, the silence of running when no one else believed it mattered. She remembered the version of herself who ran not for medals, but for the feeling that she wasn't broken. And so, she wept. She entered the world of the fastest. The bus that took her to Olympic training camp felt different. No one from her town was with her this time. No teacher, no teammates. Just her, sitting alone with a folded invitation in her jacket pocket. Staring out the window, wondering quietly, do I really belong here? The camp was unlike anything she had ever known. Wide tracks, perfectly timed drills, coaches with clipboards and whistles, athletes from all over the country, strong, confident, fast. On the first day, she stood at the back of the line. No one noticed her. No one said hello. They were too busy stretching, timing splits, and comparing personal bests. When her turn came to run, some glanced over, curious. A thin girl, not tall, wearing shoes that had clearly seen better days. Someone might have smirked. Someone might have doubted. But then, she ran, and the track went silent. She wasn't the fastest, not yet. But her time was close enough, just close enough, to make people look again. The coach didn't say much. Just nodded once and wrote something down in his notebook. For her, that one nod felt like a door cracking open. Training was brutal. Every day pushed her past what she thought her body could handle. Her legs ached. Old pain returned, whispering warnings from the past. Sometimes, it felt like she was back at the beginning, struggling just to stand. But she didn't complain. She never asked for less. She just kept showing up. She arrived early, stayed late, ran longer. Even after everyone else left the track, some started to notice. Not with words, but with respect, offered in glances, in space made for her on the starting line. One afternoon, while the others were resting, the head coach sat down beside her. He wasn't much for small talk, but this time he asked, "Where are you from?" "Clarksville, Tennessee," she replied softly. "When did you start running?" She paused. "I was 8. Before that, I couldn't walk." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Some things can't be taught. Fire inside. Either you have it or you don't." It wasn't a grand speech, but to her, Lee, it meant everything. At the end of camp, they held a qualifying race. Only a few would move on. Only a few would wear the national colors, Lee. She knew her chances were slim. She had no formal training, no sponsorships, no legacy, just herself. And a pair of legs that had once been told no. But she ran anyway. When the gun fired, she gave everything. Her body, her breath, her memories, her quiet defiance. Each stride was a whisper of every time she'd gotten back up. When it was over, the scoreboard spoke first, her name, there, one of the selected few. She didn't scream, she didn't jump. She just stood still, chest rising, heart pounding, and smiled. Not because she was proud, though she was, but because she knew. She had run not just with her legs, but with everything she'd ever overcome. She stood among the fastest in the world. The stadium that day was filled with sunlight. Flags from dozens of countries fluttered overhead. Announcements echoed in multiple languages. It was her first international race, a place where the world's fastest had gathered. She walked onto the track in her official uniform. New shoes, new surroundings, but in her eyes the same quiet stillness. Not fear, not even nerves, just presence. She was taking it all in, every detail, because she knew how far she'd come, and in her heart, she knew that every step she took now wasn't just for her. Around her stood athletes with lifelong training, Olympic lineage, coaches with earpieces and timers. Some had been running since they could walk. She had once been told she never would. The starting gun fired, and she ran. The first few strides were slower than expected. Her legs felt heavily. The pressure of the moment pressed into her chest. But then, she found her rhythm. It came back like breath. Familiar, groundingly. Like the dirt path behind her house. Like the morning wind back home, she ran. She didn't win that day, but she didn't lose either. She crossed the line fourth, just one spot shy of the podium. Not gold, not silver, not bronze, but enough to make people notice, enough to show she belonged. Her coaches smiled. Whispers traveled through the stands. There was something about her, something more than time and speed. The days that followed were grueling. Multiple events. Fatigue. A light strain in her leg. Questions about whether she should withdraw. But there was another event coming up, the 4x100 relay, and her team was short one runner. She wasn't the obvious choice. Others were faster, more rested, more experienced. But when no one stepped forward, she did. Not because she was the best, but because she never backed down when something mattered. The coach hesitated, looked at her for a long moment, and then nodded. She would anchor the relay. On race day, The sky turned gray. Light rain began to fall. The track grew slick. Conditions were unpredictable. But she stood at the final position, waiting, one by one. Her teammates ran, and when the third runner approached, she reached out, took the baton cleanly, and began her leg of the race. The world faded. No sound, no spectators, just her heartbeat, just her feet pounding, pushing. She thought of her mother, the long bus rides, the cold metal braces, the quiet belief that never left. She thought of the dirt yard, the first fall, the first step, and then she ran harder, with everything she had, and she crossed the line first. The stadium erupted. Cameras flashed, flags rose, and somewhere, beneath the roar, she tilted her head back and let a single tear fall. Not for the medal, not for the anthem, but for the girl she used to be, and the one who never stopped running. Returning home and beginning another journey. When she came home, the town lit up like it hadn't in years. Small flags lined the streets. Handmade signs hung from classroom windows. At her old school, a banner read, "Welcome home, our champion." People gathered along the sidewalks, clapping as she passed. Neighbors who had once doubted her now cheered her name. Children who once only watched her from afar now ran behind, reaching out to touch her hand. But in the middle of all the celebration, her heart felt quiet. Victory was dazzling, but it also brought something she wasn't prepared for: expectation. She was no longer just a girl who ran. She had become a symbol of hope, of resilience, of miracles. Reporters called. Sponsors reached out. More races were scheduled. More medals to chase. More eyes watching. But all she really wanted was to be home. To walk barefoot in the backyard. To sit with her mother at the kitchen table, listening to the sound of a simmering pot on the stove. To speak about things no one asked her. The sleepless nights, the aching souls, the fear that maybe, just maybe, it could all slip away. Because fame is loud, but healing is quiet. She returned to training, but something was different. Articles began comparing her to other runners. Critics questioned whether her success was just a lucky break. Every race she didn't win became a headline, and slowly doubt crept in. She still showed up, still trained. But her strides weren't as certain. Not because her body failed, but because her heart was heavy. One evening, after a long practice, she stood alone on the track. The sun had dipped behind the trees. The stadium lights buzzed quietly above. Her shadow stretched long across the lanes. She sighed, not from exhaustion, but from longing, for simplicity, for silence, for the girl she used to be. In the following weeks, she withdrew from a few competitions, not because she gave up, but because she needed to listen. She went back to her old school, found her gym teacher, the one who had first given her a pair of second-hand shoes. He was older now, but his eyes still saw her clearly. "Tired?" he asked. She nodded. Then remember, he said. Why you started running? For freedom, she answered softly. Then don't let anyone take that from you, Lee. Not even victory. That night, she pulled out her old shoes. The ones with the frayed laces and worn soles. She laced them up, walked to the yard behind her house, stood where it all began, and ran. Not far, not fast, just enough. Her mother, watching from the porch, chuckled. Still running. You're not a kid anymore. She laughed, breathless. I haven't run enough yet, Lee Mama. And it was true. She still wasn't done. Not with medals, not with crowds. But with the quiet race inside her, the one that had no finish line. And so, she just kept running. Years later, people still spoke her name. Not because of records, not because of how many medals she won, but because of her story. The one about a little girl who once couldn't walk and chose to run anyway. She no longer competed as often. Time had a way of speaking gently to the body. The aches lingered longer. The recovery took more care. But she didn't fear slowing down, because she never ran to prove anything to the world. She ran because it made her feel alive. A young reporter once sat down with her for an interview. He asked, "Do you think you're a legend?" She smiled. "No, Lee. I'm just a girl who didn't stop." He leaned in. "What do you hope people remember you for?" She paused, then said, "Hope that if there's a child lying in a hospital bed somewhere, being told they'll never walk, they'll think of me, and believe that maybe sometimes the impossible is just one step away." After retiring from competition, she began traveling, not as a celebrity, but as a quiet presence, a living reminder that it's possible to rise, even from the most fragile beginnings. She spoke at schools, hospitals, rehab centers. Sometimes she didn't speak much at all. Sometimes she just sat beside a child, held their hand and whispered, "I couldn't walk once either, just like you, but I did, and you will too." And somehow, Lee, in those moments, something in their eyes changed. Not because she was famous, but because she understood. One afternoon, as she returned to the backyard where it all began, the same hard, packed earth, the same old trees, the same wooden fence weathered by time. Her mother, now silver-haired and quiet, sat in a chair nearby, watching. Children from the neighborhood had gathered. Some came to meet her. Others came to run with her. She told them, "Don't run to beat someone else. Run for something beautiful." "Like what?" one girl asked. She smiled. "Like freedom." That evening, as the sun softened behind the treetops, she laced up her old shoes, the very same ones from years ago. The fabric was worn, the soles nearly gone, but they still fit. She jogged a few laps, not out of habit but out of joy. Her mother laughed softly. "Still running? You're not young anymore." She grinned. "I'm not done yet, Mama." And the truth was, she never really would be. No one could recall the exact number of medals she'd earned, Lee. No one listed every record she had broken, but they remembered her as a quiet fire, as a whisper of what was possible. As a girl who once couldn't stand and ended up running faster than anyone thought she could. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become part of others, those who needed a reason to believe. Because sometimes, all we need is to know that someone like us made it through. That someone once stood where we are now and kept going. And have you ever thought about a first step? The story you just heard may have been about a girl. A thin, quiet girl who grew up in a small house where dreams had to shrink to fit inside the walls. A girl who once couldn't walk, but found something waiting for her. Not on the podium, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat. Maybe her story is also about you. Maybe it's about that moment when you almost gave up, but didn't. That day you heard, you can't, and chose to try anyway. That quiet decision, made when no one was watching, to keep going just one more time. The worn-out shoes, the dusty yard, the braces, the long bus rides, with the tired eyes of a mother who never gave up. These things may not be yours exactly, but perhaps you recognized something familiar in them, because she didn't do the impossible. She simply didn't stop, even when it hurt, even when the world doubted, even when she doubted herself. And maybe that's all we're ever really asked to do, to keep going, in our own way, at our own pace, with whatever strength we have left that day. If you're listening to this tonight, maybe you're tired. Maybe something inside you feels a little too quiet or a little too heavy. But if you're still here, breathing, listening, hoping, then I'd like to think that's enough. This story, who do you think it was about? Some have guessed she was a world-class athlete, a champion who once shocked the world with her speed. Others see her simply as a girl who refused to believe in limits. What about you? Who do you think she was? And more importantly, what did she remind you of in yourself? Because sometimes we all need a quiet voice to say, "You are not finished yet." So tonight, as you close your eyes, I hope you remember this. We each carry a pair of old shoes, and if we still carry even the smallest bit of belief, just one step's worth, then the path ahead is still waiting. Sleep well, gentle soul, and if tomorrow brings light, try that one small step again. You never know what it might become.